Hello, beautiful quilters. I am excited today. I am using the Fabric Cafe book, Double Focus 3-yard quilts, which takes 2 different fabrics that you want to show off equally, plus a background, 1 yard of each to create a beautiful quilt. And I am excited to start working on this today and have a very eager helper. The pattern that I chose today is called Daisies and Diamonds. And I was looking through my fabric stash and I have a yellow print with little flowers, and then I have a blue print with yellow lemons, and I just think they coordinate really nicely together. So I'm gonna use the yellow with the little flowers for my daisy block, and I'm gonna use the blue with the lemons for my diamond block. And then I just have a solid white cotton fabric for my background. The first step is to choose your 3 fabrics. The next step is to start your cutting. Now, I can't give you sizes and inch measurements because it's not my pattern, but this is a pattern from the Fabric Cafe book, Double Focus 3-yard quilts. I think it's a great book. I've already made the cat quilt from that book, and I loved it. And so I believe when you're cutting that you should read your pattern 2 or 3 times before you start cutting, and then measure twice and then cut once, because making mistakes with the cutting can lead to fabric wastage, or you can end up with not enough fabric. So I keep the pattern right beside me when I'm cutting so I can make sure I'm getting all these cuts accurate. The first thing we're cutting is squares that we are going to use to make the daisy block. Okay, so that's an easy enough step. The next step, we're gonna cut some smaller squares out of our background fabric. We're gonna use these to do a stitch and flip or a snowball on 2 corners of our yellow daisy blocks. Okay, so after we finish all that cutting, we should have large squares of one of our focus fabrics and smaller squares of our background fabric. We're now going to take some type of marking utensil. I just used a pencil, and I drew a line diagonally from corner to corner on the back of my background squares. And then it's going to go on 2 corners, and it's going to go on 2 opposite corners. So not the corners that are side by side, but you're going to sew directly on that line that you just drew. And so I'm at my sewing machine now. It doesn't really matter which foot you use. You can use a 1/4 inch foot or just your standard foot, because you're sewing directly on the line. Later, when we make half square triangles, we're going to be sewing a 1/4 inch away from the line. But for the stitch and flip, you sew directly on that line. Then when you fold it back, it should meet the edges of your original square, and it makes a nice snowballed corner. We are essentially making a petal here, and each of our daisy quilt blocks is going to have 4 petals that look just like this. Now I'm lifting up the top layer, and I'm trimming off the bottom 2 layers just with a pair of scissors, approximately a 1/4 inch away from that seam line. And that's the petal. And we just repeat this through out all of our large squares and small squares until we have all of the petals ready for our daisy blocks. I really couldn't resist using this fabric in this pattern because I think this might actually be daisies on this yellow fabric. This is another pattern that lends itself to chain piecing, which is just where you don't snip in between. You just continue in a chain of sewing. Okay, once you have your chain of pieces cut apart, it's time to press. I'm just ironing to set the seam, and then I'm folding those corners back, and then I'm gonna trim off those bottom 2 layers. And you just keep repeating this process until you have all of your petals done. This 3-yard quilt ends up 42 by 55, I believe, and so inches. So it's a very small throw, and I was able to finish it in an afternoon. There's only the 2 blocks, the daisy and the diamond. All right, once we have all of our petals done, we're gonna take a small strip of sashing and we're gonna attach it on one end. And it's important here to have your diagram of your pattern close by, because you do want to make sure that those snowballed corners are facing the right way. So I just made sure I had the pattern right beside me so I could pick up a petal block, pick up a piece of sashing, and make sure that I had the block oriented the right way. Chain piecing for the win again. Once I had all my petal blocks oriented the correct way, it was really quick and easy to just pick up those sashing strips and just do a continual chain until I had finished all the number of blocks I needed to do. Okay, the pattern tells you to press the seams open, but I just don't love doing that. I find it very time consuming and I always burn my fingers. So I am just gonna iron each of these with the seam towards the sashing. And I thought it worked fine. If you wanna press your seams open, by all means press your seams open, but I just chose to press towards the sashing in this case. I'm now going to start working on cutting the second focus fabric, which is my blue fabric. I need some large squares to make HSTs, half square triangles. We're going to be using those to make the diamond block. And I also need some little tiny squares that are cornerstones for the sashing that goes right in the middle of the daisy blocks. All the cutting instructions are in the pattern. I find sometimes that it can be overwhelming when you see all the cutting instructions at the beginning of a pattern. And so sometimes I just don't cut until I'm ready to use that next piece. And so right now I'm ready to use the cornerstones. And so that's why I'm starting to cut into my second focus fabric. Okay, so I'm now gonna take a sashing strip and a small cornerstone, and I only need 6 pieces like this, but we're gonna start attaching a cornerstone to a sashing strip, and then later we're gonna add a sashing strip on the other side. This is gonna go in between our petal blocks to be the center of the daisy. Here, I've got myself set up to add a petal on the other side of the sashing strip that goes on the top and bottom of the daisy block. That sashing strip with the cornerstone is going to be the center of the daisy block. I just orient everything by the machine, and then I can pick up each piece and sew it, and I'll have it the right way. It does matter because since only 2 of the 4 corners are snowballed, it does matter that you have it pointing the right direction. I'm gonna press open the sashing strips with the cornerstone, and I'm pressing towards the sashing strip. I did that on the petal blocks as well, pressing towards the sashing strips, and that is so that this will nest up. Again, the pattern says press the seams open, but I prefer to press to one side so that I can nest the seams. These little daisy blocks do have a lot of steps, but I didn't find it too difficult. I just kept working through the steps consistently and slowly, and you could start to see the daisy block build. By comparison, the diamond block seems super simple compared to the piecing that's in the daisy block. So if you get through the daisy block, the diamond block is a breeze. Next, I'm adding a sashing strip to the other side of that cornerstone. There's only 6 of these strips, so it goes really fast. I'm continuing to press everything towards the sashing strips. Okay, we now have all the components needed to put the daisy block together. We have our unit that has 2 petals and a sashing strip, and we have our unit that is 2 sashing strips and a cornerstone. So I'm going to set myself up by the machine. Because I pressed everything towards the sashing strips, my seams will nest up, and I find this helps me to get a nice neat center. But again, the pattern says press the seams open, so make your own decision there on what makes you happy. I just did a quick finger press by the machine so I could add on the second unit of petals to the other side of my cornerstone strip. And that is a completed daisy block. Then I'll take it over to the iron and give it a good press. But that's the daisy block, and there's 6 of these in the throw size. And the pattern does have instructions. If you want to make a twin, you would need 6 yards of fabric total, and then it sizes up again for a queen or a king. I'm just making the throw size, which is the 3 yards. Okay, I mentioned the diamond block is going to feel like a breeze compared to the daisy block. All we're doing is making half square triangles. So we're using the 2 at a time method, and that's the way the pattern is written, is to use the 2 at a time method. So you need matching squares of your second focus fabric and the same size squares in your background fabric. Again, sizing is in the pattern. I'm going to use a pencil and draw a line diagonally from corner to corner on all of the background squares. There's not really a right or wrong side of the backgrounds, because my background is just white fabric. But if you had a background fabric that did have a wrong side, you'd want to draw your diagonal line on the wrong side of the fabric. And here's Snowflake coming to check out what I'm doing and help me. Okay, it turns out she just wanted to observe. She wasn't ready for pets. I'm going to continue on with getting ready to do my 2 at a time half square triangles. I'm now back at the machine, and I have my squares of my blue fabric, and I have the matching background squares with the diagonal line. I'm going to just stack them right sides together, and then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch away from the line. So I'm using my 1/4 inch foot. I'm putting the edge of the foot right up against that drawn line, and I'm sewing on both sides of the line. Now, when we did that stitch and flip for the daisy block, we sewed on the line we drew. But for this one, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from the line. Now I'm going to just iron to press the seam, And then I'm going to take a ruler and I'm going to go ahead and slice this block in half. I'm cutting on the line I drew earlier. Then I'm going to iron these open, and that makes our HSTs, which is a half square triangle. I'm going to use my scissors to trim off the dog ears, and then you can trim the block down to the correct size. There's not much to trim off, and then you just use your half square triangles to form the diamond block. With the goal of nesting seams, I pressed one of them up and one of them down so that then I could nest these seams together when I put the diamond block together. These diamond blocks go together so quickly because it's just the 2 at a time half square triangle method, trimming your blocks to the correct size, and then you just put those 4 half square triangles together into a diamond block, and it just goes super fast. And so the second half of the quilt, I just felt like I breezed through. I did this entire throw size quilt in about 5 hours total from start to finish. A few things I learned making this pattern is that you definitely want to use non-directional prints because those diamond blocks are getting turned, and even in the daisy blocks, they're being turned every which direction. If you use a print that needs to be up and down, such as a print that has animals or faces or just something that needs to be directional, words, it's going to get all jumbled up. So you definitely want to choose a non-directional or a tossed print for this pattern. It is important to trim your half square triangles down to the correct size. There's not much to trim off, but if you don't trim it, it ends up being a little bit too big, and so you don't want to trim your block down after you put your diamond block together. Otherwise, you're going to lose your points. So it's better to trim at this stage, and I am using the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, and that's a nice, easy method for trimming half square triangles. In this case, you would use that ruler to trim them down before you iron them open. And the way that that ruler works is you choose the size you're trimming to, and you lay that line on your stitching line, and then you're able to trim the edges. Now, it is easiest. I went and grabbed my rotating cutting mat. The easiest method that I have found is to lay it down, and I use the background side up. That way I can clearly see my stitches because it's kind of blending into the print side. And then I'm going to lay my Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer on there, and I'm making sure that the correct line is on my stitching line. Then I can just rotate this mat. The pattern doesn't give you a lot of excess to trim. The Fabric Cafe patterns in general are very low fabric waste. They say that they are economy quilts, and they're trying to use all the fabric. So you're not trimming much off, but it does make a difference in having everything turn out to be the right size. The quilt assembly went really fast. There's only 24 blocks total in the throw size quilt, and there's 6 daisy blocks and 6 diamond blocks, and you have 4 rows with 3 blocks in each row. I'm now adding my borders, and I just thought this was a darling quilt. I thought my fabric choices were cheerful and sunny and matched the theme of Daisies and Diamonds. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, hype, share it with someone who might also enjoy it. And thank you for joining me today. Thank you for watching. I love reading the comments from everybody, and it just encourages me and motivates me to keep going. And I hope you guys have a beautiful day, and happy quilting.